Hi all, let's look at the last round game of Hikaru Nakamura, who really needed to win this game to avoid any tie-break with Ray Robson. So it was all on this game. Could he win the US Chess Championship 2015? He was playing against Alexander Onischuk. He played e4. After e5 from Onischuk, knight f3, knight c6, we were treated to the Scotch game. Potential for great excitement in this territory, less explored than the classic Roy Lopez. So e takes d4, and now not the usual knight takes d4 here. In fact, another move, a bit rarer, bishop c4. This variation allows black to hit the e pawn immediately with knight f6. White ideally wants to sometimes play bishop c4 because c3, there's an idea d5 is equalizing for black. So bishop c4 can be potentially dangerous, but this leads into a different theoretical line. So knight f6, e5, and now black plays d5 here, bishop b5, knight e4, knight takes d4, very trodden Scotch game territory, bishop c5, bishop e3, and black is often playing in this position a natural looking bishop d7 with the pressure on c6. This is a little bit more adventurous to castle here. It looks as though doesn't white win a pawn here, isn't this quite dangerous? White plays knight takes c6, hitting the queen, b takes c6, and here it's far too dangerous to take on c6 trying to win that rook. White will just get slaughtered. For example, bishop takes e3, and if, say, really greedy, then bishop takes f2, and then it's end of game after bishop a6 check. And if less greedy here, with f takes, it's still a disaster. Check, and then knight takes g3. This is horrible for white. So white's continuation is forced here, not really interested in taking on c6. He can't allow this. So bishop takes c5. Now after knight takes c5, here is where white can actually try and potentially win both pawns. Bishop takes c6, but he's activating the rook, which is coming down to the 7th rank. And of course this is annoying, not ideal. White castles here, rook takes b2, and now gets another pawn. So he's still a pawn up for the moment, but obviously c2 is dropping. Queen takes d5, bishop takes d5. So when black wins c2, it seems all that white's done from the opening is to get the queens off, get some pieces off basically. He has an advanced pawn but seemingly easily blockadable, and there's a rook on the 7th. It doesn't seem a major outcome that most players with white would want. So has Nakamura mucked it up? Ray Robson, on the other hand, is doing well in his game. So maybe at some point in this game Nakamura was a bit concerned. This wasn't really perhaps the outcome he had really wanted, but he can at least evict this rook from c2 with tempo with knight a3. So here the rook doesn't really want to go here because maybe knight b5, hitting it again and getting one of these pawns. So we see rook e2, going for e5, rook ac1, and now if black really wanted equality, black can actually just play knight e6 here. And it's difficult. I mean, engines have this as virtually dead equal. You know, black's got this active rook on e2. If the game continued, say like this, bishop takes, just to win c7 and a7. This isn't particularly good, this position, because rook c8 and this knight's kind of stranded here. This would be a clear way of black equalising. Knight b1 gives some activity again, rook e2, and this pawn, black can get behind it and has active rooks. So this wouldn't be ideal. This stumbling knight here hasn't got too many opportunities. You can imagine this kind of position. You know, this pawn's going to fall off if nothing. Once black sorts out the back row, that would have been a great way of equalising. But what we have instead of knight e6 was actually knight d3, a little bit more active looking, aggressive on f2. Rook takes c7, bishop e6, wanting maybe to join forces with this rook on f2 if white took, but white doesn't have to take and activate black. No, the bishop just retreats and holds on to material for a moment. Okay, so for the moment 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4. So white is temporarily a pawn up, and it's perhaps here that black slips up again. Maybe black should immediately take on e5. He didn't. He actually played a5, which was questioned by Nakamura himself as maybe a bit of a slip up. If knight takes a5, knight takes e5 rather, rook takes, black should be able to get this b pawn. If he takes and goes for the b pawn, sorts out the back row. Now there's a slight little tactic here. Rook takes, there's knight d4 to bear in mind, but if the rook gets out of the way, this b pawn is quite vulnerable, and if white tries to keep the b pawn, then he ends up losing the f pawn. And you might think, well, isn't the pawn dangerous? Well, technically, actually, black could set up now a blockade. Here, black's now threatening the back row mate. So if we in this variation, so here black can set up blockade, and it should be okay. This pawn, this position rather, should be tenable for black. But yeah, black actually played after bishop b3 a5, and yeah, it's how to make something out of what looks to be absolutely nothing nearly. Nakamura played rook a7. So bishop takes, a takes, rook takes e5. For the moment, equal on pawns, but Nakamura is going to be a pawn up yet again with knight c4, and this time with a difference. He's going to be this pawn up, yes, but black still has some active rooks, it seems. Rook b5, rook b1. There's no a4 here because this rook's holding against a4 in the pin. Knight c5, but now knight takes e5 really holds on to the pawn. White is a pawn up here, and it's now quite tricky. All of a sudden, Nakamura has he's what seems to be a pawn up. Rook e8, as though, hold on a sec, can white afford this extra pawn? Is it a luxury too far? Black is immediately threatening a back row trick. You know, knight takes and then rook e1 if the rook comes off. So white makes space for the king, and black makes space for his king to free the rook up, so there's no back row mate for black. And now we see b4 emphasising, you know, white is a pawn up here, but is white now faced with a horrendous attack? You know, with the rook and knight coordinating on f2, and maybe this one's swinging cross. So visually, you know, maybe we'll be a bit nervous here. We've got this extra pawn, but is it at the expense of black heading for white's king here? Well, we see this centralising move, knight c6, keeping an eye on the central squares, and that's very useful. Rook e2, as though that's really kind of a natural move you play to counterbalance the extra pawn here. But Nakamura simply plays a very calm move. He doesn't need a defensive move on f2. He attacks the attacking pieces. He plays rook. Well, before I say it's a rook move, I've said it's a rook move, but do you know where? 5 seconds. He attacks the attacking piece, that one. And it's difficult for black here. Black's best to try and hold on, and it's grim, would have been in this position to play the move rook b6, counter-attacking the knight here. For example, rook takes d3 like this. White still has an extra pawn, and there might be a bit of work to do to try and hold this, but that's probably black's best, you know, grim defensive try to accept a pawn down in this rook and pawn ending. But white is slightly better with some chances. But instead, unfortunately for Alexander Onischuk, he plays knight takes f2. And can you spot what white plays in this position if I give you 5 seconds starting from now? Okay, knight d4, just forking both rooks. And there looks to be an important check here. But in fact, another cunning move is played in this position. Just sidestepping with king h1 after check. Now, not a repetition, but actually king g2. So now the rook is attacked here, and black, unfortunately, is losing material. After knight d1 check, that was played, knight takes e2, end of game. Black resigns. Just lost the rook. Yes, a pretty unfortunate end to this game. It seems as though Nakamura was almost a bit fortunate to keep the extra pawn, and then Black went for his king, and the pieces going for his king seem to come actually unhinged here. If we look at this position just for a moment again, yeah, it seems quite tricky indeed. What does Black do in this position? You know, something like knight e1, this carnivorous king time, king f1, munching. There's not really much. If knight e5, this is also bad if the knight wants to retreat here, because we get this pin against e2 and it's protected by the knight here. So this is unfortunate. You know, knight f3, king g2, and it's a carnivorous king after. It's going to be better for white. If f6, say like this is going to end up being a nice rook and pawn ending for white. So yeah, it was a difficult position, but this is just immediately disastrous for Black. This is really a little bit shocking what happened from such humble beginnings of the advantage for Nakamura. But with it, he won the US Chess Championship without having to go to tiebreak. So congratulations to one of my favourites. Well, to be honest, my favourite Super Grandmaster at the moment is Hikaru Nakamura, and I'm very happy he won the US Chess Championship. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.